Thank you so much, gentlemen. You know, our musicians come in usually around 9:30 on Sunday to practice their craft and to prepare themselves for this time of sharing with all of you. And I was thinking about practicing the craft in terms of delivering a Sunday message. You know, I have probably 500 different talks that I've done. Every Sunday I'm always drawn to come up with something new because I want to enjoy what I'm saying too. Or at least be somewhat spiritually fed by it, I hope. And so, you know, people here have on occasion said, you know, give us a lineup of what you're going to say like a month out so that we can get some books or something that you're going to refer to. And I'm like, I hear you, but you know, for me, I pay attention to the guidance starting tomorrow, Monday. I start paying attention and I look and I'm intuitively listening to what's coming to me. And there were three areas that came to me this past week. One was a video that I was drawn to by a man named Paul. And you may think, well, is that Paul from the Bible on the road to Damascus? And no. It's a man named Paul who was on a road called Penny Lane. Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney doesn't know that I'm a dear friend of his. But I've been loving Paul McCartney since I was 7 years old. And this video with a gentleman named James Corden, he does this thing called carpool karaoke, which is kind of corny, but the name of it anyway, but it's fun. And did you know that Paul McCartney's video on a trip down memory lane of Penny Lane, stopping in at barbershops and pubs and talking about, and the home where he grew up, in 1 week's time had 24 million hits. And it still continues to grow and grow and grow. Because the man, for me at least, has always brought joy. Great joy. And that's part of spiritual life. And I remember at one point in the car when James and Paul were singing, he was talking about Let It Be. Paul was talking about at a very difficult time in his life, 69, 70, 1969 or 1970. He was having a real tough time. And his mother came to him in a dream. Her name was Mary. And she said, "My son, just let it be. It's going to be okay." And that has become such a popular song throughout the last 47 years or 48 years now. And I was so touched by it that James put it into the CD player and they started singing it together. And James teared up and had a few tears, and because he had lived that song with his life, his whole life, and he's probably no more than 35 or so. But he heard it for the first time with his father. And so the story goes. Well, this talk today isn't about Paul McCartney, but it is about guidance. It is about what comes to us through our weeks and through our days that give us strength and give us joy. And I remember sitting there just watching that video, feeling that joy. And there was one point in the video where a woman went and put a coin in a music machine. And it was a song, I guess it was all kind of rigged. She put the coin in there, and it started to play, and these curtains drew back, and McCartney was there playing with his band. And there was probably 100, 125 people in this pub, but the woman was just in absolute tears because of the road that she had traveled with Paul. That was one example of guidance for my week, and another one was to go see a movie. Won't You Be My Neighbor? With Fred Rogers. New movie playing at the Rialto in White Rock. And I was a little bit too old for taking in that show, but I do remember watching it on occasion and how Fred Rogers was a great former, and he was very formative in so many millions of children's lives to remind them to have dignity and that each child was important. Each child mattered, no matter if they were what lifestyle they would grow into or the color of their skin or any of that. It made no difference to Fred. He was committed and devoted to the well-being of all children. And we've got 2 or 3 generations that are hopefully feeling a lot better about themselves as a result of him. And he said, at one point, he said, when I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news. And my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And to this day, especially in times of his own trouble, of course he's passed now, but as he wrote this, in times of trouble, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers in the world, so many caring people. So it's a good reframe for us when we are having challenges, fear responses of the world. We can reframe that and say, well, I wonder how many people are helping to correct this trouble. And how important that is, and that how maybe we can become a helper in a situation. And then the third element of guidance that I had was by watching another video. Actually, it came first through reading an article by that was included within a magazine called The Sun, S-U-N. It's been around for about 47 years. It's top-notch poetry and beautiful short stories and so forth. But Pema Chodron stated within this article, which was entitled Intimacy with Fear. I found that to be an interesting title, Intimacy with Fear. She said the essential theme of her teaching is the principle of shinpa, or attachment, which she interprets as a moment-to-moment look at how we get hooked or how we get triggered by stuff that's in life, that's fear-based. And how do we get out of it? And in Buddhism, for instance, a little light on Buddhism today, there's a tremendous influence or emphasis on the fact of impermanence, of detachment, because life is impermanent. But her focus, and she's a Buddhist monk, head of an ashram back in the northeast of the United States. Her emphasis is about attachment, about looking at how we attach ourselves to our thoughts, to people, to things, and that how we create fear in our lives through that attachment. So she believes in detachment, but first she says you have to go right into what it is that you're afraid of. To be a warrior of sorts into the images of fear that we might have. I thought then of Fred Rogers, who addressed fear with little people, children, by saying that, we fear when we don't have enough love. That fear is a result of not having enough love in our lives. A lack of love creates fear. When Pema Chodron began her time of transition out of, because she had 2 bad marriages, that she was betrayed within the context of each one, betrayed by her husbands. She was furious. And so she looked for another way of life. And she dabbled and experimented in lots of different religious traditions and landed within Buddhism because it made the most sense to her. And she said, maybe I was running from my domestic life, maybe not. But it sure found a good ground for me. But when she first started to attend, she's about 81 now, when she first started to attend a meditation group, there was a woman facilitator there that was giving her guidelines on how to practice. And she said, the teacher said, please don't go away from here thinking that meditation is a vacation from fear or irritation. She said that when we meditate and go deeper within ourselves, we may have a catalytic pattern within ourselves where we feel more fear, because that which is unhealed within us comes up for healing. But we always have to remember the goal, which is self-realization, which is being within our center and living from that place as much as we possibly can. And each one of us have these challenges that we deal with that are fear-based. But even if you've been meditating for years and years, and I've been meditating for 35, 40 years now, I still have lots of times of fear that come up in me. And it requires us to be a spiritual warrior, to say, okay, all right, I'm experiencing fear. What are you teaching me? Versus being distracted and say, oh, I don't want to sit. I don't want to face any of this stuff. What can I do to, make myself feel better? Nothing wrong with feeling better. In fact, I guess there's a fourth element that I wanted to share, was the movie Eat, Pray, Love that came out 7 or 8 years ago. Julia Roberts was the star in that, and she also had marriage breakups, a marriage breakup, and she decided to go on a pilgrimage first to Rome to eat and enjoy herself, and that was beautiful. And then she went to India, to Calcutta, and became part of an ashram where she learned how to pray. And she met a man there that was somewhat intrusive in her space, and she got mad at him quite a bit. But then they became friends. And they confided with each other because he was there as a result of having a lot of alcoholism and almost ran over his child with his car when he was drunk coming home one night. So he went to the ashram to change his life. And she said, when asked, "Why are you here?" she said, "Well, I just want to learn how to live, and I want enlightenment." And he said something very important in my view. He said, if you want to enter the castle, you first have to swim the moat, or else the castle is a house of cards. He didn't say that. Those are my words. And I've learned this so true that over the years that I've been involved in this work, that if we just want to feel good, if we want to run away from our fear, what we're running towards is basically just a house of cards. But if we want the stability and the groundedness and the knowing of a true relationship with the divine, which is our own nature, then we have to do the work. We have to do the emotional, spiritual work. We need to be able to swim the moat, to go through it. So people here that are gathered here today, you are spiritual warriors. Because I'm making an assumption that you want to do the work. You want to move through whatever it is that's a perceived block within your own life. I want to read something from this article by Pema Chodron that is an illustration of this very point. She said, I once attended a lecture about a man's spiritual experiences in India in the 1960s. He said he was determined to get rid of his negative emotions. He struggled against anger and lust. He struggled against laziness and pride, but mostly he wanted to get rid of his fear. His meditation teacher kept telling him to stop struggling, but he took that as just another way of explaining how to overcome his obstacles. Finally, his teacher sent him off to meditate in a tiny hut in the foothills. He shut the door and settled down to practice, and when it got dark, he lit 3 small candles. Around midnight, he heard a noise in the corner of the room, and in the darkness, he saw a very large snake. It looked to him like a king cobra. It was right in front of him, swaying all night. He stayed totally alert, keeping his eyes on the snake. He was so afraid he couldn't move. There was just the snake and himself and fear. Just before dawn, the last candle went out and he began to cry. He cried not only in despair, but from tenderness. He felt the longing of all the animals and people in the world. He knew their alienation and their struggle. All his meditation had been nothing but further separation and struggle. He accepted, really accepted wholeheartedly that he was angry and jealous, and that he resisted and struggled, and that he was afraid. He accepted that he was also precious beyond measure, wise and foolish, rich and poor, and totally unfathomable. He felt so much gratitude that in the total darkness he stood up, walked towards the snake, and bowed. And then he fell sound asleep on the floor. And when he awoke, the snake was gone. He never knew if it was his imagination or if it had really been there, and it didn't seem to matter. As he put it at the end of his lecture, that much intimacy with fear caused his dramas to collapse. The world around him finally got through. In 2003, I was involved in something called the Advanced Course by Landmark Training. Some of you are aware of that. The Advanced Course is a 3-day program of intense self-mirroring. And I remember being in that group with 90 other people. Some of those people were congregants in my church in Sacramento, California. And what they asked me to do, and everybody in that room to do over 3 days, was to stand up in front of 90 people and talk about your fear. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done because I had a persona as minister that I did not want to let go of because these people, I felt, saw me in a certain way. Well, I finally broke through that fear, and I got up and talked with people, 90 people. And we all held space for each other during that long weekend. And something very beautiful happened. As I shared my fears, the distance between all of us went away. And we became very, very loving with each other. All of us. One of the most important times in my whole life. Because I realized that really the only thing that separates us is our fear. We deal with extreme inertia in our lives around all of it. And it really never goes away. We think sometimes that people that are high-level saints or whatever don't have fear anymore. But the truth of the matter is, well, I'll just read this paragraph. No one ever tells us to stop running away from fear. We are very rarely told to move closer, to just be there, to become familiar with fear. I once asked the Zen master Kobun Shino Roshi how he related with fear, and he said, I agree. But the advice was usually to sweeten it up, smooth it over, take a pill, or distract ourselves. But by all means, make it go away. And I have to tell you, in the last 17 years of ministry, getting up in front of people where there's been a lot of fear and a lot of doubt. And it's okay. Because that fear and doubt has moved me deeper within myself. It's there for a reason in all of our lives. But we choose whether or not we're going to be run by it or feel the doubt and do it anyway. Do it anyway. Prepare yourself. Get clear about what it is that you want and feel the fear and do it anyway. That's how we're spiritual warriors in this life. Paramahansa Yogananda said about people that would go out into the jungle and live and recluse from the world. He said, that's not the way of a spiritual, strong person. The way of a spiritually strong person is to go into the world and live and deal with everything that you and I deal with every day of our lives. So we've all had to face our own snake in the hut, and we'll continue to. But I would like to give you a practice, because we can talk about this all we want, but unless we have a way to move through our fear, then it just persists. What I do in my practice is what I call it is I drop into the heart and I center in the core of being. And I invite you to do that with me now. Close your eyes and just drop your attention down into your heart. And then drop down to below your feet. Ground your energy from your heart and down into the center of the earth. So we are grounded in our earth path. Bring your attention back up to the base center below your feet. And surround yourself with the grace of God that holds you as the beloved. Sometimes we feel so cut off in this life experience. So that the space around you and within you begins to feel like an inner temple that nothing can harm. And move back up into the heart center. And the heart center is this place, the meeting ground of heaven and earth. And then up the silver cord or the anakarana, up into what is called the I Am Presence or throne of God above your head. And just allow heaven and earth to then meet within your heart so that you are soundly knowing of your own divinity. That whatever you may be experiencing in your life, there is no human condition beyond the Spirit's ability to heal, correct, and have a divine solution. And just be aware of the people that are around you right now, fellow souls on their own eternal path. Bless them from this awareness. Behold the Christ within them. Bless them so that they may be healed and restored and to move forward in their own on their path. So this is about divine remembrance. Just feel the energy. For just a moment. And allow it to settle, and allow yourself to very gently and peacefully come back into the awareness of the room. I wanted to share one last thing in closing. Someone shared with me just yesterday that the spiritual teacher Adyashanti was here over the last 2 days, and that when he was complete with his work, he came out, sat down over here, and was making some notes. And he said, you know, the spiritual energy in this room is very good, very high. Adyashanti is a teacher, not from the East, but involved in the Eastern traditions, born in Berkeley, California, but has attained a level of enlightenment. He's a very good teacher. But for him to be sensitive to that is a beautiful thing, because what we're building in here is a chalice. It is a power of divine energy. And this is a place that you can come for healing. I think that that's worth talking about and being with each other over. Thank you very much. God bless.